So the next panel we've got coming up, as the speakers kind of make their way towards the stage, CAW. Probably something that everybody in this room and everybody in the industry continues to hear about, computer assisted wagering. I think that you hear a lot in the media, whether you understand it, whether you understand why it's important, whether you have negative feelings or get the impression that it's a demonization for the industry. A lot of things are tied into this topic, and it's certainly very relevant in this day and age. So while it's been a topic, it's been in the press, it's certainly been brought about in different conferences. There's a different aspect that I wanted to make sure at least our group heard. So I titled this with the help of, after reaching out to Dan Ross, CAW, a business perspective. And the reason I say that is because, again, a lot of the discussions around CAW can slightly be, at least seemingly, negative. But in May of this year, Dan, our moderator, wrote a very good article in the TDN, beginning to kind of spell out the why it's important to horsemen's representative groups. It's important to understand kind of the back end of it. And for those of us like me, it does become very complicated to the point where it's almost not understandable. But I thought Dan's article was excellent, and it really kind of compelled me or propelled me to have a panel at our conference that really gave an understanding of the business perspective. So again, what does Eric mean by business perspective? Now, there's some anecdotal percentages that get thrown around. So I'm just going to say, let's say at your track, the handle is about 30% from the CAWs. If the CAWs, which some people clamor that they want to go away, where's that 30% going to come from? Where are we going to make that money back up? Not that we have an answer to that solution, but the fact that I don't believe that side of it gets touched on enough. You know, again, there's pros and there's cons, and we've assembled a great panel here to really discuss that and a little bit more depth into exactly what we're dealing with. So I've mentioned a few times, Dan Ross, if you have not read his pieces in the TDN, you probably just hadn't been reading the TDN, but Dan is an excellent writer. He's become a great sounding board for me on and off the record. So it's really good to have somebody who understands the industry, still writing freelance, but is that kind of Walter Cronkite mentality, stays in the middle, tells you the facts, and tries to be on both sides. So we appreciate that. Obviously, everyone, I believe, in this room certainly knows Dave Basler, the executive director of the Ohio HBPA, but also very influential on the national stage, currently being the committee chair for both our Model Rules Committee and our Medication Committee. Dave's been stalwart in this industry and certainly for the national HBPA. Pat Cummings has been with us a few times, got a new title, executive director of the National Thoroughbred Alliance, but really happy that Pat was able to join us. He has been speaking on this topic, and I think doing a good job of trying to be an educational piece so that people really understand why it's important to understand CAW. And then my buddy Jack Jaworski, certainly last but not least, now, maybe even a surprise to some folks here, president of the NYRA Content Management Solutions, no longer with the Stronach Group, but Jack and I go way back. We're not going to talk about that party at Adena Springs several years ago, but it was a good one, and we all kind of still remember that. So I'm going to thank the sponsors of the panel, Thoroughbred Racing Association of Oklahoma. Really appreciate all they do, and the Nebraska HBPA both helping us to assemble this panel that I believe everyone in this room is going to be excited to hear. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dan and we'll get started.
Great. Well, look, thanks, Eric. Yeah, and look, thank you for inviting me to be here to talk about computer-assisted wagering, which I think if you're talking about the long-term sustainability of this sport and the long-term economic viability of this sport for you guys who are out there, you know, working day in, day out in the sport, I think there's no more important topic than computer-assisted wagering. As Eric kind of pointed out, though, it's a complicated topic that, you know, I can speak personally. I've spent a fair bit of time trying to wrestle with it, you know, try to understand the fundamentals, you know, how it works, how these operators, how these gamblers, how they impact the betting markets and how the betting markets impact the industry's bottom line. And even now, I find myself sort of sat in a corner dribbling, wondering how all of this works. So luckily, these three gentlemen here are way smarter than I am. And by the end of this hour, they're going to have the whole thing squared away. No problems anymore. So I'm going to let these smart people talk. So I think a really good start here would be to sort of just, you know, just to kind of lay out how these gamblers work, how the teams that they put together, how that's different to the average gambler, all of that stuff. So why don't you take it away, Pat, kind of lay it out, sort of the fundamentals of that.
Sure. So for perspective, I tackled this topic when I was working for the Thoroughbred Idea Foundation, and it was really April of 2020 when a lot of us were sitting around and kind of frustrated with life for sure. And we noticed the degree to which betting was changing. You couldn't, most racetracks close their doors. And if you didn't have an ADW account, you had to go get one. And that slow trickle shift from cash in person or OTB to ADWs happened very quickly. If you weren't on board, you got on board pretty quick. And looking at some of the reports that were coming out across the industry and just trying to understand where all the money was coming from. And it's very important to understand exactly what we're talking about when we say CAW. CAW, Computer Assisted Wagering, is an acronym that has been adopted and really represents a very small number of horse players who are using some sort of automated program to place bets. They develop finely honed systems, algorithms that assess vast amounts of data and place their bets. Don't take this literally automatically, but in a very quick fashion, right before, oftentimes, not always, but right before the races begin. They're able to batch bet. So you could think computer assisted wagering. I use a laptop, I use my phone, I'm betting essentially on a computer or a mobile device. Is that computer assisted wagering? No, that's just using an internet connection to place a bet. But there are a selection. My research from a couple of years ago, I didn't know a lot about it, but I immersed myself in the space, developed a lot of contacts and sources, accessed a lot of public information through freedom of information requests at different states to learn more about this, and realized that there's probably 10 or 12 top tier players in America that are using this approach to wager on horse racing. And those 10 to 12 players probably represent somewhere between $2 and $3 billion of US thoroughbred racing's $11.6 billion in wagering from last year. 10 or 11 or 12 or 13. Okay. Of those, there's probably one player who's right around $1 billion individually. A second player behind that who's very close, maybe around, 900 million, something like that. Okay, so you have this group of 10 or 12 or 15 players. And then below that, you have another group of smaller CAW players who may be betting somewhere between 5 and 50 million or 5 and $25 million a year. And they're also using algorithms that they develop and constantly are adjusting the measurements in their system to place bets. So on a race here tomorrow night, there may be $4,000 in the win pool at 1 minute to post. And when the race goes off, there may be $10,000 in the win pool. And in the last 1 or 2 tote cycles, a chunk of that money has come in from these players that are betting in an automated fashion where their program may say to them, bet $125 on the 5, bet $272 on the 4, and $357 on the 6. And it all goes in one lump sum. And of course, they're betting exactas and trifectas, and they're betting every pool that they're allowed to bet. The more exotic the pool, the bigger their handle, the more they're playing. I was contracted in a consulting role with a horseman's group previously and asked to analyze their particular state's performance with CAWs. I don't do that anymore, but I would highly suggest that you consider doing something and looking into how our CAWs and frankly, how our mass market, ordinary customer, Twin Spires, Naira Bets, Express Bet, how are they doing? How are they doing in the win pool? How are they doing in the exacta? How are they doing in the pick 4 pool? And look into how customers are performing over time. And in the one state that I looked at, the worst performance in any one particular pool that I saw was an 8% loss in the win pool. Meaning that if the customers were betting $100 in the win pool, the CAWs betting $100 in the win pool, they got back 92. That was the worst of the pools by performance. This is one period of time, 1 year of performance. These customers, these CAW customers, have vast teams working for them. I'm sure some are smaller than others, doing various forms of analytics. They are employers, essentially, of these individuals. They're betting pretty much every race, every track, every pool, every day. They are your biggest customers individually. The story that I think emerges most about this is that if we have such concentration of 10 or 12 or 15 players that are betting that much money, what effect does that have on the average horse player who is engaging with your product? And there are tremendous parallels to the earlier discussion about fixed odds and where that resides. And I think that's what, something we can get into later on. But in sum, the CAWs are a very small number of individuals who have teams working with them, trying to maximize their return. They are the best players. They are the equivalent of high frequency traders in the stock market. And they affect every angle of the wagering pools in which they reside.
Right. It's another bit of a housekeeping question. This is for you, Jack. Can you sort of just sort of broadly explain what's the difference between a computer-assisted wagering platform like Elite Turf Club? It's probably the main one out there. What's the difference between that and similarities as well, and these other wagering platforms that you know, the rest of us little folk use? And what, what would you have to do to, what do you have to, offer to be able to bet through a platform like Elite?
Well, first, let me introduce myself for some of you. I only know a few of you actually, probably. So I've been to a couple of these. It's my first time speaking. I've been in the business on the track side for about 17 years now. I started with a group called TrackNet, left my practice of law, joined the industry. I grew up in Louisville, Kentucky, a fan of the sport. So that was Churchill and Magna. That went away after a couple of years. And I spent about 14 working for the Stronach Group. And then 6 months ago, I got the opportunity to go work for the New York Racing Association. So I've worked for all the big players in the industry, and my focus during that whole time has been simulcasting. Uh, in fact, I was originally hired at TrackNet as the wagering security and integrity officer. And one of the first things I did was the elites and the RGS. There's another group called IRG at the time. There's a couple others were relatively unknown. There was a lot of whispers, a lot of, what are we getting ourselves into with these guys? And myself and some gentlemen from the TRPB spent quite a bit of time over those 2 years I was there, meeting with the owners, meeting some of the players, going to their offices, seeing their operations. I've seen several of the computer players' operations. One myth is in very rare circumstances, these bets aren't put in automatically. There is a guy there, the bets are generated off their betting model, but there's somebody there physically hitting a key to put those bets in. In part, that's because most of our racetracks don't go off on post time. So you can't set it automatically to go off at post time. It varies player to player. A typical time is that first horse loading into the gate. They will put a first batch of bets in. And there may be a batch or two after that, but that's typical and it does vary among the players. The difference, let me go back a little bit, even before I got in this industry. I was at a conference last week where the legendary sports gambler Billy Walters spoke. And he opened with, in this game, every day, there are winners and losers. That's how the gambling business works. I think that's important to keep in mind. We're not looking to, take advantage of players or, have them have a bad experience. But at the end of the day, not a lot of people make money in this game. Before I got into this game, there's a guy named Ernie Dahlman, the big better on the New York racing circuit. And Ernie had a lot of data at his fingertips. And in fact, at one point, he was set up in a Vegas casino room with his own teller and multiple TVs. And Ernie also did things like, this is back before you knew what shoes were on the horses. Ernie paid guys to be at the paddock at Naira races to tell him what shoes each horse was wearing. It was part of his handicapping model. Was that fair that Ernie had that information? The average guy didn't? Well, it's gambling. And then when it's pari mutuel, you're going against the other bettors in that thing. The Ernie Dahlmans of the world, frankly, those are some of the guys most pissed about this because they've been passed by a little bit by more sophisticated modelers. And of course, with the rise of technology, the Ernie Dahlmans of the world are now these computer players who have vast amounts of data. They're always looking for what's another piece of data I can add to my model to make my model better. And with the rise of technology, very few of us are standing in line anymore at the window at post time, hoping I get my bet in. We all have the ability to get that bet in at the last minute. There's two differences these guys have. They get a rebate. They get some of the best rebates in the business because of the volume they wager. Now, I will tell you, most of your takeout sensitive players are also getting a rebate. And if I'm a $50,000 or $100,000 better or bigger a year, there's a platform out there that will give you a substantial rebate on your play. The other thing they have is the ability to get those bets in at the last minute more than the average guy. You know, I can, you know, in this day and age, I can have a file upload. I can have a whole list of bets and get them in right at the end, even as an average guy. I cannot get the volume these guys get in because of the number of bets they can generate and get into the system. And that's where, you know, we as track operators and horsemen need to be looking at them and saying, okay, what's the impact and what's the best thing for our business as far as these guys? So I've gone on a bit, but those are the two main differences, the best rebates and the speed they can get those bets in.
Great, thanks, Jack. So this is one's for Dave. Can you give us a bit of a primer? You know, Jack's already sort of broached it, you know, rebates, but can you explain to the horsemen out here just how this impacts their bottom line, the rebates, the host fees, and the takeout portion, how that all works together?
The directly to our bottom line in terms of horsemen is the host fee. The the host fee is the fee that you charge for each year outlets to take your signal. So that's what directly impacts it. The other part of that equation that sometimes doesn't get taken into consideration, I think enough in terms of of this topic, the CAW players, is the volume that they do. So net to your bottom line is your host fee times your volume. And there's a tipping point. The CAW players are very cost sensitive. And depending on what your takeout is and what your host fee is, that number can get to a point where your handle becomes less. You're trying to maximize handle from the CAW players because they're your biggest customers. They're unquestionably your biggest customers. I don't care which track you're at. Might be a different percentage for a small track than a big track, but they're your biggest players. So directly, it's the host fee, but indirectly, it's that volume times host fee equation that gets to where the horseman's bottom line is, and the track's bottom line for that matter.
And it's, you know, a rule of thumb, right, is host fee is 50-50 split between purses and tracks, right?
That is typical.
Yeah. So, you know, anyone but in here, you know, and tell me if I'm wrong. So this is how I sort of broadly understand it, right? So you've got, say, let's use this rough 20% takeout. Is that, you know, a good roundabout figure? And so then you've got your host fee taken out of that. Let's just, you know, for shits and giggles, let's just say it's 5% to keep it, you know, keep it simple. And then so that leaves another 15% rebate potentially, right? Roughly. I know there's other sort of bits and pieces taken out, but that's
There's usually, on rule of thumb, there's probably 2 points in costs.
Right.
Between your tote and other things on top of the host fee.
So that, okay, okay. So we got that. Let's just use, you know, simple. We'll use a 5% host fee and 2% on top of that, other things taken out. So that's so that leaves us with 13% rebate, roughly, right? So let's say if they're winning, you know, and I think it's not unreasonable to expect some of these really successful players to be winning at a 95% win rate, even more. I mean, what do you reckon?
That's,
Pat?
and, you know, Pat used the example, the lowest win rate in that, you know, his sample size was, you know, 92%. Looking across a lot of tracks over the years, I would say 92% is much closer to an average than a low. There are times they will, and again, I compare these guys to a grinder at a poker table. These guys are not hit, you know, they will have some big wins, but it is betting every track, every day, grinded it out. They don't win some days, they don't win some weeks, but overall they do win. And you know, it's closer, you know, 95 to 100%. That's rare. And if they're up there, when you're looking at the end of your meet, if there's a win percentage, you know, getting up there, you probably want to look at it and talk with your track and say, what do we want to do next year with these guys? But also keep in mind, the same player could be 97 one year and be 89 the next. Some of these guys, you know, occasionally shut down, have to retool the whole model and come back because they're losing. So But yeah, I would say 90, 92 is more typical than.
And even at
85 or
the,
above.
and as Jack says, and I think that that's probably close to the number in Ohio is the 92%, mixed through all the pools. But you figure with a fairly high takeout in Ohio, in the host fee and the 2% added, if they end up at 92, it's about a 6% keep. If you bet $1 billion a year and get 6% of that, that's a pretty good number.
So just to, just want to sort of just so everyone kind of understands it. So if we're talking 92% win rate roughly, and let's just say a 30% rebate, what that means is they're winning at 105%, right? Roughly.
Yeah, they're making
Correct.
5%
Correct.
on their
Yeah.
handle overall.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does that, so I know Pat, you've dug into this world. Does that sound, does that 92% sound pretty comparable
Yeah.
to what you hear and see?
For the case that I looked at, which was admittedly, just one track, right? One location. That was what I saw. And as they bet into trifectas and superfectas and pick fours and pick fives, it was positive. So for every $100 they were betting in a pick five, they may have won $120, $115, and then got their 10 or 12 or 13 or 15% rebate. So if you made 15% on your flat bet and then you made a 15% rebate on that, now granted, on the pick five, there may only be 2 a day, right? But could you turn a 30% profit? Yes, it's possible. Are you going to do that every day? Probably not. But put this in comparison with the alternative. The average player should be losing the takeout. Bet 100, the takeout's 20, the net pool back to the players is 80. Okay. If one segment of the population that may represent 30, in some cases higher percent of the overall pool, if they're playing to lose 8%, then the takeout that is felt by normal customers, the effective takeout, is higher than 20%. It may be 24, 27, 30. What I have found is the more exotic the bet type, the worse the mass market does. And if there is anything that horse racing has been very successful in doing in the last 20 years, it is pushing ordinary customers into bet types that are tough to win. Okay. Pick four, pick five. They'll dangle low takeout in front of you and say, hey, here's a low takeout pick five. Well, guess what? If you don't pick 5 winners, your takeout's 100%. Okay. We have succeeded in pushing our customers into bet types they are unlikely to win. Meanwhile, all of the growth in legal wagering has generally been in fixed odds sports bets that are 50-50. And the only area that a lot of the sports betting operators have been winning in is these multi-event parlays. Hey, bet this, this team to win, that team to lose, this team over, and the number of yards that receiver has in a game. And if I put, that's essentially my sports betting pick four. Guess what? Those are highly profitable for the sports books that are taking those bets. They want you to bet that to make some money because a lot of them are losing money right now. So we have seen horse racing essentially do the opposite of where all the sports betting evolution has been for a very long time. As much as it is easy to focus on the big bright numbers of 10 or 12 people betting hundreds of millions of dollars a year, and wow, it's hard to envision, and all the algorithms and the systems they put in place and the batch betting and getting it all in at the last second. Say, wow, this is like not the game I grew up with. It isn't. But to me, the story remains the effect on ordinary customers. We still need people coming to the track or sitting at home and betting on horse racing. And it got very easy to ignore that need when our purses are being supplemented by things that have nothing to do with racing wagering. Now, those purse supplements are fantastic in many respects, but they come with challenges, such as we are not focusing as much on the ecosystem tied to wagering as we may have done in the 1990s, right? That has changed. So when I'm from Pennsylvania originally, my undergraduate college experience, I wrote my senior thesis on the efficacy of slot machines at Pennsylvania racetracks in 2001, right? I was very for it. What I could have never imagined is that 25 years later, practically, over 90% of all prize money that is given out in Pennsylvania comes from the Pennsylvania Racehorse Development Trust Fund. And when 90% of your prize money comes from customers in the casino, you lose sight of the importance of wagering and connecting with customers on a day in, day out basis. It is not as important to the corporate interests that are involved. So I'd really like to challenge the horsemen's groups to thinking more and spending some more time focused on how do you exercise your rights as horsemen to ensure that mass market customers, ordinary bettors, are staying engaged in the sport that you prepare horses for. And the more you do that, the more focus you put on that, the better.
That leads perfectly into my next question, right? So I think it'd be really useful to understand, how these deals are made and who has oversight of them, who has ultimate sign off on them. I know I'm in California, and so I know the way it works over there is before the meet, every meet, the track associations, they come to the TOC, the Thoroughbred Owners of California, with a list of host fees, and the TOC has ultimate sign off on them. They can yay or nay, and thumbs up, thumbs down. So in California, it's they have the ultimate power to agree or not to agree. How does it work? This is for both you and both Dave and Jack. How does it work in your jurisdictions? Yeah, do you want to kick off, Jack?
Yeah, I'm gonna push back on some of what Pat said. I said I've been in this 17 years almost. That entire time, the people I've worked with in simulcasting have been focused on this and watched this handle because it is a big chunk of handle. We look at the deals being made with those, what we set the host fee. And it's evolved. When I first got in this, these guys weren't in all the horizontal bets. They weren't in the pick 5, pick 6. They had to develop the models in order to get into those. That's part of the reason their growth is they weren't in every pool before. Now they are in every pool in which they're allowed to be. And honestly, there used to be some tracks that didn't allow them. Some of these guys figured out how to get other ways into those tracks. So there was a California meeting recently at which it was kind of like, oh, no one's been minding the store on this. That's not true. Now, there are some tracks, we know who they are, where the simulcast director is now also the mutuals director and the publicity, and he's setting the morning line, and he may not have the bandwidth anymore to keep an eye on this. But I can tell you, working 14 years with the Stronach Group, the California horsemen certainly paid attention. The Florida horsemen certainly paid attention. The Maryland horsemen paid attention. And I think majority of, trust me, there's days I'd rather not deal with Dave Bassler because he knows too much, So, overall, we've all looked at this. I can tell you each track is different, but, they're less than 20% at NYRA of the pools. Part of that's because they're not in my win pool for the most part, because we don't let them bet after 2 minutes to post. But, if they're up at 40%, yeah, there's probably some tracks where they're 40%. They probably shouldn't be that high. But at the same time, if your handle's less than $1 million and you don't have big fields, they're going to be a bigger percentage of your handle. It's just probably how it's going to be. I can see it in Naira when we switch from Aqueduct to Belmont, Belmont to Saratoga. They will bet more into a bigger pool, but it's not a 1-to-1 ratio. So the bigger your pools are going to be less percentage. But if they're more than 30%, you may want to take a look at it and say, are we at the right level? I can tell you the number one thing you should be looking at, though, and we all get fixated on handle because it's the number that gets reported. What you really should be looking at is how much are these guys taken out of the pool versus how much are they paying the track and the horseman and host fees. And if that ratio is out of whack, then you need to be looking at how to adjust it. The easiest way to adjust it is the host fee being charged. I could tell you the other thing you've got to keep in mind is there's Elite, there's Velocity, there's RGS, there's PGI, there's Parabet, there's Centurion. There's a few groups out there. You need to know all the possible places those players can come in, because just like retail player may have 3 or 4 ADW accounts, most of these guys have a couple of different places they can put their high volume handle through.
At least 2.
Yeah.
They almost all have at least 2.
And they are price sensitive and they want the best deal. So if you take somebody to take, an Elite to 5 and you leave RGS at, RGS caters really to 1 or 2 players, but if you leave Velocity at 3, those players are going to migrate, and all you've done is move the handle over from one place to another and you haven't done everything. So when you move them up, you got to move them all up and set them at the same level, or you just risk these guys going to a different outlet and you haven't accomplished anything. Now, sometimes that can be difficult. You may get pushback from some of these platforms that don't want to do that. My experience is as long as it's Elites on a level playing field, and for those of you who don't know, Naira does own a minority interest in Elite. That's what Elite cares about, the level playing field. Not interested in their customers getting an extra advantage by having a pricing advantage. But that's the other key when you're a horseman looking at these deals, that, making sure everyone's a level playing field and how much are these guys taken out of your pools versus how much are you, the horseman, getting and the track getting out of that betting.
Well, hold on to that thought about individual deals between players and tracks. So I do want to get into that, but I just want to sort of throw that original question over to Dave. How you handle the contracting side of things. And I'm just a part of that. I'm interested, how, because it's been an evolving field and a rapidly evolving field. What do you find most difficult trying to ensure that you're getting the best deal you can for your constituents?
I think there's a lot of different answers to that question in terms of the people in this room. Certainly the people who have the Stronach Group as their track owner, we're going to have a different negotiating platform. Same thing with the CDI tracks than I did in Ohio. Stronach Group packages their tracks. They are not going to let horsemen negotiate on their behalf. Same thing with CDI. So they bring you a deal and you sign off on it or you don't sign off on it. I was a little different in Ohio. We have 3 tracks, 3 different ownership groups. And I thought that the best way to potentially maximize our revenue from the CAW groups was to package those signals together. It was more than 300 racing days a year at that point in time. That gave us more pricing power than the individual tracks had themselves. I can tell you the tracks were terrified. They did not want me to talk to the major players. I sat down at the time before Naira and some other groups bought into Elite. It was a 2-person operation, Sam and Marvin. And I sat down with Sam and Marvin, had hours and hours worth of discussions with them. We came up with what we thought was a fair host fee rate. Their concern was it's a big jump. It's 70% jump from where we're at now. If you do that in 1 year, you're going to lose our players. They're price sensitive. If you do it in a 3-year incremental fashion, and as Jack said, do it for the other groups. There weren't as many groups at the time, but there were, RGS certainly was at the time. You do it with them, then we're okay with it. And that's what we did. So that model has been in place for the better part of a decade. We price the same for player management group. We price the same for velocity, or approximately the same. As Jack said, that's important. You can't go and there are, I mean, I'll tell you, the equation became more difficult, I think, for horsemen and independent racetracks when certain racetrack owners bought into these companies, because it made the negotiations sometimes somewhat more difficult. And then they became a buyer as well as a seller, and that sort of blurred the lines. I don't think Jack's group was as bad at that as the other group that I mentioned was when they first came into play with their CAW group.
Well, hold on to that thought as well, but so as Jack says, so roughly you reckon CAW play constitutes about 20% of the overall handle. Is that in NYRA? Is that what you said?
It's less than 20 at NYRA.
Okay. So what about in Ohio, Dave?
I just ran the numbers the other day. We are closer to 40%.
40%?
Correct.
So that's interesting because we get, okay, Pat.
Well,
you wait.
yeah, just for perspective on this. In 2004, the industry funded a study to see how these markets were evolving. It was early internet era, right? And the general assessment at that point was total handle 8% was coming from the CAW players in the early days of CAW play. If you look at just the raw handle figures from 2004 to where we are now, total handle is down about 25% raw nominally. Okay. If you adjust for inflation, it's down 50%. Okay. If you segmented the customers of racing wagering into 2 buckets, CAW and everybody else, and you assume that the number from 04 was correct at 8%, and that today's number is somewhere on average around 30%, a third of total betting, something
It's
like
too
that.
high, Pat. The numbers don't bear that out. I know you like to throw that number out there. The numbers overall across the industry is less than 30%.
All CAW players.
Yes.
The CAW players that are that show up in ordinary NYRA bets and Twin Spires handle too, the 10 to $40 million a year players.
All of them are less than 30% across the board. They may be 40% in Ohio. The other thing to remember is they're not 30% at a Del Mar, at a Santa Anita.
Well, they are in
Gulf
certain
Stream.
pools, right?
Pat, you like to use the individual headline number
Yeah.
as out there as look how bad this is. We got large numbers here. One thing we have in racing is lots of data, and they are not 30% in the big tracks, which constitute the lion's share of the overall handle. So, and I also, I know I see the handle. I've been looking at handle number 17 years. It is not 30% across the board CAW. Certainly nowhere near 40%. You throw those numbers out and they're simply incorrect.
Well, tracks in Ohio, Dave is saying it is 40%.
Yes.
So on tracks that may be similar to those in Ohio, we could
Yes.
assume that it's around 40%
Well, if
there.
it's less than 20% at NYRA, yeah. some of
I
those
will
tracks are gonna
acknowledge
be
it's
higher.
not, yeah. And we also know from public information that in California at Del Mar, in the Tri, the Super, the Pick 3, Pick 4, Pick 5s, CAWs are over 30% of the pool. We know that. Public information. And I think it's worth adding here that when a reporter from the Financial Times found this data from California, published information about it, the California Horse Racing Board, which had been publishing it for 16 years, 17 years, went in and pulled it. So it was no longer there. and has changed the way in which they've reported ever since. So it feels as though we struck a chord in those who were being more transparent about this information over time. I am not against CAW betting. In fact, we have a CAW player here amongst us today who just flew in, Don Johnson. Well, Don's not the player, but Don works for a player, and we can certainly ask Don some more about this. But I am not against the use of algorithms, batch betting, CAWs. Horse racing needs all of its customers. We need more of them. It is the negative effects that one group of customers cause another. And the point I was trying to make earlier is that if you were to assume, and maybe my assumption is a little high, that 1/3 of play is in that CAW space altogether, maybe it's 25, maybe it's 27, maybe it's 28. But when you adjust for inflation over the last 20 years, the non-CAW play is down by more than 2/3. We have seen an erosion of our mass market customer base by more than 2/3 over 20 years. That's really bad.
Just want to jump in. So what is the number then? If it isn't 30, what is the overall number?
I'm not going to give him specific numbers at this point. So I can
Well,
tell
come
you
on, come on,
the
tell-
numbers, honestly, I'd have to run the numbers first of all to have to give you an exact number, but it is
Work
below
for them, Jack.
I know the overall handle at those main things, and it's less than 30%.
Is it over
it's-
25?
Honestly, it could be, but I'd have to run the numbers.
I
But
don't
it's
think-
below 30.
I don't think it matters what the exact
It-
number
it,
is.
It absolutely matters because you talk about the impact on the everyday player. And our calculations is at our tracks, it comes out to about a 2.5, maybe 3% hit on takeout to a retail player. Now, part of this comes down to what do you think the importance of takeout is on your betting product? I could tell you this issue to me, I'm going to potentially strike a chord here. This is becoming the LASIX of betting. We all were in a furor and a hullabaloo over LASIX 5-10 years ago. As not being a horseman, I still don't know what the right answer was on that. There were people on both sides of it with valid concerns about it. Everybody was interested in the welfare of the horse, but we spent so much time talking about LASIX when it wasn't the real problem, because whether it was good or bad, everybody was using it. Nobody was getting an unfair advantage over using it. The real problem was the guys who were cheating. That's what we needed to be focused on in that. And we spent a whole lot of time and gave ourselves a black eye in the overall mass media by horses are running on drugs every day. And it sounded like we were drugging our horses. The real problem right now is not the computer guys getting these guys for a couple extra points of takeout. The problem is we don't have enough retail players. And we're not doing enough to get retail players. And part of the problem is we don't have a compelling betting product on a day-to-day basis. I think the number that was put out yesterday is our field size nationwide is 7.4. It needs to be 8. It really needs to be 10. And then takeout doesn't matter as much. But the computer guys are not the problem. We know how to manage it. We know how to maximize our revenue out of it. It is not what's killing the game.
I got a little bit of different take, Dan. Whether it's 25%, 28%, 29%, even if 40% in Ohio. My take is, and has always been, I'm a decent handicapper. I've won a lot of handicapping tournaments, qualified for national championship 6 times. I'm not in the same stratosphere as the computer assisted wagering players. They are so much above anybody who picks up and looks at a daily racing form is in terms of the hours they put in, the dollars they put in, uh, every aspect of it. And to me in life, if Jack and I are sitting playing poker against each other every night, he may win some, I may win some. If we're sitting playing with Daniel Nagano every night, we may win a night or two, but we're going to lose overall because he's a better poker player than Jack is. He's a better poker player than Dave is. They're better players than we are. The best players are going to win, and I can't level that out. No matter what I do with takeout, no matter what I do with host fee, I can't make the guy who comes in and bets the 7-horse in every race be on the same level as the guys who spend $7 million in programmers looking at every factor that there is to look at in horse racing. They are extremely, extremely smart men and smart women and put as much time and money into this game as anyone. So I don't begrudge them winning. Now, is there a tipping point? 40 is probably close to that tipping point. But I also have a different equation than some of the other racetracks do. My on-track handle is 2.5% of my total handle. So I don't really have a hardcore group of customers that 2.5 or 3%, or maybe it's 4%. I don't know what the number is that they actually take out of the pools from the average player that I'm losing. I've got transient gamblers across the country that on a Tuesday afternoon are going to bet Mahoning Valley because there's not a lot of product out there. I do 1.6 million that day, and if I run on a Saturday where there's a lot of product out there, I might do 8 or 900,000. So yes, overall for the industry, I think losing retail customers is a huge deal. I don't think it's directly related to CAW players. I think, sports betting obviously is part of that equation. Just there's a lot more entertainment out there and a lot more options for people's dollars than there were 30 years ago. So I think it's sort of an industry problem that I think sometimes gets blamed on CAW that really isn't a CAW specific issue, if that makes any sense.
Markets evolve,
Yeah.
right? It's without question, markets change. And as we saw more, so if we went from 8% to 25% in 2 decades, the shrinkage of the mass market is not entirely in any way, shape, or form exclusively because of CAW's growth. It's not one customer growing has knocked a bunch of other customers out. Entertainment options have changed. More wagering opportunities have emerged. More legal opportunities to wager have emerged. I think Jack and I have a lot more common ground than it might seem, in that we believe the sport needs more mass market customers. We need ordinary bettors. I thought the earlier session on fixed odds, the portions that I heard, are spot on. You need to look and evolve your markets, create more of them. Look at your racetracks. How have the betting menus changed in the last 20 years? We added a pick 5. That's what we did. We haven't done much. Racetracks across America have not evolved their markets, the options that are facing customers. But if you go to sports books, and there's one little area I disagree. Dan Hartman, love Dan. In Colorado, I don't think the betting on table tennis is driving people to go get themselves into table tennis. I do think horse racing is far more engaging. And so by putting it out there, you have a chance to get more people engaged in the sport. And for the bettors who are frustrated with horses going into the gate at 5-1 and coming out at 5-2, in at 10, out at 4, there is a very attractive quality to the certainty of fixed odds, of a sports betting style bet on horse racing. And I'd like to echo the words of what Ed said earlier too. Different states, different markets, different issues. Everyone has to address those individually. I get it. But we need to be evolving our wagering ecosystem to bring more people into the fold, to keep up with the times, and to present a product that is engaging the customers. And I think we have seen an overall degradation of that over the last 2 decades.
Just want to jump in, just go back to something that you said, Jack. So, you think that, the industry has got it right with CAW, that it's managing it, managing it in a balanced way. Are you talking, through NYRA's lens or the industry's lens? Because, I think it's fair to say NYRA, you probably do more to probably the most aggressive jurisdiction in managing CAW play than anyone else. So, are you looking at it through your lens or an industry-wide lens when you say that?
I would say it's not just NYRA. I mean, I was at first, we absolutely managed it there. And, for those of you who know Patrick Troutman at CDI, if you don't think he's, not on top of this, Patrick knows his business. So the big players are absolutely managing this. As I mentioned, some tracks don't put the time into simulcasting they used to. So, are there some tracks out there that, could be doing a better job? Probably, and that may be an opportunity for Horsemen to pick up some of the slack like Dave did in Ohio and, get to the forefront and say, hey, have you looked at this? Have you looked how much they're taking out of the pools, what percentage they are? Because it's, again, that host fee gets split 50-50. We're in this together. We want to maximize revenue. None of us has spare money, floating around in this industry right now. So we're looking to maximize revenue. It's in the track's interest, but if the track isn't paying attention, by all means, the Horsemen step up and pay attention and get on top of it. So I think overall, we're aware of it. It's a constantly evolving situation. I mean, there was a time where we were doing a lot of individual deals with individual players. Some of those deals were good. In retrospect, some of those deals did not work out the way we thought they might, so.
And some of them have been undone.
I'd say, majority of them have been undone at this point. Even the ones that were probably good, we might have gone, the other way. The other thing is, is one price for every elite player the right answer? I don't know. It might need variation in price because again, you're trying to figure out, their handle overall will go down the higher that host fee goes up. So you're trying to find that sweet spot where they're betting the amount that gives you the maximum host fees. Because at some point you raise it too high, it's going to drop. You're actually going to be costing yourself money.
Well, I want to jump in there. Do you think overall tracks are being aggressive enough in that manner? Do you think if they were to raise host fees across the board, another half a point or a point, whatever, do you think that's going to frighten away these players when you see, they're winning, say they're winning 105%, right? If what's 104, 105%? I mean, do you think overall tracks really are being aggressive enough? And if you did raise it a point, do you think you're going to scare them away?
I adjust my rates. I've been there 6 months. I've already adjusted the rates.
How much?
That's, you wouldn't ask, MGM or Caesars, what's the hold in their slot machines? What's how much they're making from the table games? I don't mean to be, not forthcoming, but that gets into sensitive business information at that point. So I can tell you I raised it. I'll tell you that. But I think it comes down to take a look at it, take a look at all the CAW outlets as a whole, and ring me up. I'm happy to give you my opinion for what it's worth.
Yeah.
And tell you. What do I think you could move it up or not, or, whether, you're at a good level. I mean, it's not, I won't say it's not a science, but it's not something where you change it and go, oh, well, that's absolutely the right answer, because 2 years from now, it might change. These guys might figure out something else and you might need to make another adjustment. I mean, it's, so, I would say we're on top of it. We've been on top. The big boys have been on top of it for a long time. And some of the smaller guys like Dave, But you have to stay on top of it. You can't look away for 5 years, and not pay attention. You should be looking at it at the end of every meet, sometimes even during the meet.
Like Jack said earlier, some players come into this space, bet a bunch, and it doesn't work out. And they stop and they go away. They merge with another team. Horsemen have rights. You are the contract signatures. Okay. You have rights in how your product is treated. Exercise them, right? Work with the tracks, work with the content providers, know what's going on with your signals, know how customers of your races are performing. Look at this, right? Trust it, but verify. That information should be available to you. And if it isn't, I would be asking some more questions. Why do we not have optics on this? Right? Understand how customers are interacting with the product that you fight tooth and nail to put on. And this should be part of a healthy sport. There's no question about it. It's been, it's the very reason that we have all the supplements. Horse racing brought all those supplementary sources of revenue to the table for us. It's great. But the markets change. You need to change with it and you need to stay on top of it.
I want to jump to something Dave said earlier. You talked about how track ownership of some of these platforms has made it a little bit more difficult for you, the horsemen here. You've got Elite Turf Club, which is majority owned by the Stronach Group. You've got Velocity owned by Churchill Downs. And I've spoken to CAW platform operators and representatives, and you say this looks like a blatant conflict of interest, and they'll answer no. It's this is how it is. It's how it's always been. Track operators own other betting platforms other than CAWs, just the way things always have done. But do you want to talk about how it's made it tougher for you, but advocating for your horsemen?
Me specifically, we have not been impacted in Ohio only because the deals that were cut prior to Velocity being in place. They were cut prior to the Stronach Group and Naira owning Elite. But I think in general, it makes it more difficult. It's not a conflict in the Stronach Group's mind because it's obviously the ultimate goal is the profit motive, but when you control both the content and the buying end of it, it becomes a conflict in for those who are trying to make deals with you. It's you're not going to potentially get the best price you can get from Velocity and not end up paying more for Churchill Downs host fee, not end up paying more for Fairgrounds host fee, because CDI controls that. Same thing with Stronach Group. You're not going to get the maximum price from Elite and potentially not pay more for Santa Anita or potentially not pay more for Gulfstream. So that they just it shifted the balance of power and made more power for the negotiating side for the CAW groups, and they were already pretty strong to begin with. They control that much handle. I think the flip side of that, and it's dependent on the group, but in terms of the topic we were just talking about, host fee rates for the groups in here, as Jack said, there's no perfect model that tells you what the perfect host fee is going to be. But I would say the total handle you control very much dictates what your host fee can be, how high that host fee can go. And when I say total handle, that's your number of racing days times your average daily handle. It's not $10 million a day for 10 days. That's $10 million. Or $100 million. It's the total number of racing days. If you got 500 racing days in your state that you control, and it's $1 million a day and you control 500 million, you've got some pricing power. If you've got 60 racing days at $500,000 a day and you're at $30 million total handle, you don't have any pricing power. Whatever they give you, and you can go to them and say, I'm going to get a half a more point, and it's not going to happen. So I think that you can judge your relative strength in negotiating by your total handle you control.
One more question. I want to bring in Don Johnson, and open it actually, open it up to a Q&A, but I just want to give you, Jack, just an opportunity to respond to that, the conflict of interest argument that gets raised a lot. I just want to give you an opportunity to respond to that as a man at the heart of that.
I understand where Dave's coming. I've been, I've worked for groups of tracks my whole career in this industry, first TrackNet, then Monarch, and now NCMS. So, I understand where Dave's coming from, representing just the Ohio tracks. And, I've had the good fortune of either having Santa Anita or Gulfstream or, Saratoga to sell, and, it's easier to sell and it's easier to, command a premium for those signals. The conflict of interest, I mean, again, the California Racing Board last month had a meeting. I think it was just another opportunity for them to beat up on the Stronach group. But this whole thing about conflict of interest, I get when, Dave's got to negotiate with Elite, which is now owned by Santa Anita and Gulfstream. That makes it harder on him. But in the context of, Santa Anita, is it a conflict of interest for it to own Elite? Santa Anita has always controlled the wagering, whether it's at the window at Santa Anita or at the, Southern California OTB network, or whether it's ExpressBet. I can tell you, none of these deals involve profit sharing between Elite and the players. So, I mean, that's the whole point of pari-mutuels. We do not have an interest in the outcome of the race. So from the conflict of interest standpoint, it is not a conflict of interest any more than it is that we run the pools, we run the windows at Santa Anita. But again, I just want to say it. I get where Dave's coming, that it makes it harder on him. I get that.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think Jack's right. I don't know that it's necessarily a conflict of interest. To me, I think the better way to say it is a balance of power issue. And when you combine those, both of them are powerful alone. When you combine Santa Anita, Gulfstream, and Elite together, that's a strong balance of power that sometimes tips the scales against horsemen and smaller tracks trying to sell.
And I hear a lot of that criticism, and I see a lot of it on social media. I think it's unwarranted. I think it's born out of frustration from a lot of players. But I do tend to believe that we are far better having control internally within the industry over CAW operators than them acting independently outside of that. That is an argument that has been posited by Elite Turf Club. Scott DeRudy in his remarks to the CHRB said as much. I believe that makes a lot more sense than this being completely independent and kind of, outside of the control of the industry. We just need to maybe control it a little more.
I just, I want to play devil's advocate here, right? So, in my reporting, and it's been, the cut that a CAW platform would get is anywhere between 0.5 to 1.25, right? That was, I think, do you think that's a fairly accurate number?
Yeah, I think that's, yeah.
So in your, we know, or I, seen the numbers, just the top 7 Elite Turf Club players handled close to $2 billion in 2023. So, I mean, in an age when everyone's doing it so tough, right? And let's just say it's 1%. 1% of $2 billion is quite a lot of money.
It is. And that's, again, I don't want to go into the inner financial details of Elite.
But you could, isn't it a fair argument to say?
It is a fair argument. You've done the math. The other aspect is those fees for the big players are capped on an annual basis. So at the end of the day, it is not, those guys aren't paying 1% of handle. And to understand, I mean, Elite's keeping the tote fee and Elite does a fair amount of work for these teams. There's a whole, there's a team in Curacao that works on all the data, the reporting and the rebates and everything. And then, of course, they contract for racetracks both in the US and international. And then, but it's the elite's not keeping 1% of $2 billion. It's substantially smaller than that because these guys, of course, are negotiating with elite because they want as much as that takeout coming back to them as a rebate. So it's very much a service or a utility versus, a big profit center for the Strana Group and NYRA.
I see time's ticking on. I'm going to open this up to the public. I know, is there, okay, there we go.
Yes, I'm Bill Walmsley and I'm president of the Arkansas HBPA, one racetrack in Arkansas, and that's Oaklawn. I've been the president. I'm a volunteer. I'm not paid. I do it because I love it and I love the industry. I have been president there for over 25 years. When I took over, Oaklawn gave me a list of maybe 1,000 sites that they wanted to export their signal and asked me to just write a letter for consent. I gave them the letter back and said, I want to see all of the sites. I want to take a look at them. And what I did, I sent them up to Wilson Shirley. And I said, Wilson, tell me which of these sites are rebaters, which of them are CAW sites, because I want Oaklawn to make a profit where we've got a place to race. And that means they need to have people on track. They need to have people not only to bet, to buy their drinks there, their food there, things that will make that racetrack successful. I would bet anecdotally that virtually every racetrack in this country that shuts down has not been shut down because of the racers, the people, the trainers and the owners and the horses. It's been because the owner of that franchise was not making a profit. And they're not making a profit if they don't have those people there to pay for the boxes that they buy, the other things besides just wagering. So I think it's absolutely vital. I take everybody off. I don't think Elite's a bad outfit, but I take them off because I think it runs people away from my track and I need them there. We've sat in a posture when Dave was up there fighting with 1,500 people maybe at a track, where we'd have an average daily attendance of 10, 12,000 people. And as a result, we got good things from it. But I do think that what you have to think about, in addition to what y'all have talked about, is what's the impact on the franchise holder? Can your racetrack at Prairie Meadows stay in business if it doesn't have very many people on track? Can the other racetracks stay in business? Because if they don't stay in business, we don't have a place to race. And it's just that simple. And I think that's a side that gets forgotten about a great deal of the time. I hear people who are on track who say when that horse was 5-1, when he went in the gate and goes off at 3-1, damn it, why am I here? I'm at a disadvantage being here. I have had cooperation from Oaklawn because I don't grant consent to anybody that I think is a rebater or that it is a CAW site. In addition to that, Oaklawn, for me, at my request, monitors the 1,200 sites that I do approve for export. And if somebody's getting an inordinate profit on a regular basis, we look into them and I have the right to withdraw my consent on that site. So that's what I wanted to get across. I think y'all have been the best panel that I've heard, but I really think we have to think about what we traditionally have regarded a little bit as the enemy, and that's the track ownership. we got to think about them a little bit and how not having people at the track will affect their profitability. So I want to thank y'all and I appreciate your comments. I think this is something that probably the average horseman knows next to nothing about, and probably got one of the best education experiences today from you guys on this panel. So I thank you.
Thank you,
But-
Judge.
I know we can probably go all day, but as far as questions, who might else have a question? Got Ed Fanassi, Louisiana HBPA.
I wanted first to go back to something y'all said early in the presentation and would ask y'all to maybe clarify your message a little bit. The CAW's winning does not change the takeout, right? What it does is lower the payoff when the rank and file customer wins. And when you talk about it reducing the, increasing the takeout for the other players, it can be very confusing. Takeout is set by pool. It's the same takeout for everyone. There isn't it. I understand what you mean. when-
Effective takeout versus takeout.
Effective, right. But I would ask you to just clarify that what it does is reduce the payout to the rank and file winner because their winning percentage is so much higher, right?
Yeah,
The re-
100%. Yeah.
The rebate doesn't really come into play at all. It's the fact that they win at such a higher percent.
If one segment of your customers is doing really well, has a high rate of return, and the total takeout on the pool is 20%, then the other customers who won will not be getting back as much because it was disproportionately won by a small segment of
It
customers.
dilutes their return.
And that's what I'm talking about, looking at the money room. If takeout's 20%, in theory, everybody ought to get 80 cents back on every dollar they wager. We all know that doesn't happen. Ernie Dahlman back in the day was impacting Jack Jaworski's takeout because I can't handicap to save my life. But the issue is how much are they impacting your retail player? And if that ratio, if you're not benefiting as the track and the horseman enough from that impact on your retail player, then it's out of whack. You want to make enough money off those computer players that you're made whole or hopefully even a little bit ahead off the impact to your everyday player that's just there to gamble.
Correct. And it's only impactful to the degree that they're going to do churn. If they're not churning, it has zero impact on. the
Churn,
overall
baby,
player.
churn.
Thank you.
Well, certainly I think that this panel, and I appreciate Dan and all the panelists for really kind of highlighting what I'd hoped, and that was really looking at it as a bit differently. And as I said, a business perspective, because realizing it or not, Pat and Jack both nailed it. Pat talking about the reason why horsemen need to be paying attention in their contracts. Jack talking about how we still need to grow the wagering opportunities and what we haven't done for, let's say, the average player. So, I mean, this is a real, in my opinion, of the vanilla panels that have been on this topic before, this was a serious panel, and I hope everybody appreciates that. So, Mr. Johnson.
No questions, Don. I'm not answering anything.
I'm not going to ask a question. You have to forgive me for not standing. I thought this panel important enough to come here. I had a surgery about a week ago, so I'm not completely recovered yet. I'm Don Johnson. I work with my own company. I'm with a number of CAW players over the years, a couple of them primarily. And I've been doing this, oh my God, I remember when we were testifying in front of the Oregon Racing Commission years ago, over 20 years. And some of the same discussions I'm hearing here today were discussed 20 years ago during that testimony relative to, first of all, it was called a robotic player back then. We changed the acronym to computer assisted wagering because There's nothing completely robotic about this. It still takes human beings, even in this age of AI that's out there. We play around with the AI a lot, but it's not going to build you a model. You still need to know what questions that you're going to ask AI to come up with different formulas. We use AI to shortcut some of the research that we used to have to do, but it's still not going to build you the model. I mean, we could go on with this all day, but I just took a bunch of notes here. I'm just trying to browse through them. Look, all of what is done, whether it's at a casino, whether it's a CAW player looking at the pools, it's all data driven. So you had a presenter, Susan, that was up earlier with the showing some stats and stuff with the blood horse. Yeah, we buy all that data. If you're selling it, we're probably buying it, and we're going to try and make something from it in the form of a probability line. As we think of it like putting all this information, like a random forest of information coming from around the globe, from tens of millions of people, whether they're on the internet whispering about it or whether we're buying it from Trackmaster, Daily Racing Form, we're buying, or whether we're sending out scouts that go to tracks to create our own data, whether it's, I mean, you wouldn't believe some of the stuff that's out there now from the form of facial recognition for horses. You as owner and trainers that are in here probably recognize these things a long time ago, but you know when your horse has a temperature. Well, the average player isn't going to know that. But this new technology, we're getting information from facial recognition that is giving us paddock notes now that we would not have had available just even a few years ago. Anyway, I'm digressing into how you might go about actually building a model. Back to it, it's not so much for us yet. Yes, CAW players are price sensitive, but it really gets more to the point of and we're competitive with each other as well. Even though we're in deep competition with some of the other CAW players, some that were spoken about up here, we're also respectful to one another. And I don't believe that the CAW player, as some have shared up here, are the demise of what's happening in horse racing and its pools. Yes, competition is going to cause it to be more difficult for the recreational player. But I think the more important question we should be asking is why is our, and I include myself in this, I've been in racing, was born into it, been in it my whole life. Why are we not competitive with what they're offering at a casino? Or why are we not as attractive to these younger millennials and Zen generation or whatever they're calling themselves today in attracting them to our sport versus sports wagering? Probably because they grew up doing not sports wagering, but doing all these sports that they can now wager on. Not every inner city youth has the ability to get out to a racetrack, or they probably will never touch a horse or have never touched a horse or been involved in in any aspect of our industry. I mean, you had a speaker here yesterday from Amplify. I don't know if Anise is still here, but great organization, by the way. Fantastic, where they are getting the message out there that we have a career path in racing for all youth. You want to come take a look? We probably have something for everybody. Think about the industries that we represent, from carpenters, farming. Not everybody has to be a jockey. I was a jockey at one point, 40 some years ago. Anyway, I'm digressing again.
Is there a question in here?
No. The question would be, is it not necessarily the Jack or Pat, and I'm not trying to pick on anybody up there, but it's a couple of things that you have to look at when you're looking at how a player plays into your pool. It's not necessary. When I say it's not a one size fits all, it's when you're doing special deals. And I'm not opposed to somebody doing a B2B deal with a specific track. I think that's perfectly okay. And in the past, we have done B2B deals with some tracks. Some are still in place. It's not just the ROI that you're making out of the pool relative to your contribution to the pool. There's another aspect to it. It's how you're taking the money out of the pool. So it's your win rate, but how much are you also spreading out? Are you just damaging the relationship between the favorite long shot bias in a pool by pounding down these hot favorites so much to the point that the hot favorites now, which come in about a third of the time, so that's going to affect the economics of your pool more than if you were betting long shots in the pool. And you're right, these teams, if you want to call them that, they're very good at handicapping because they're using more information. They're analyzing more information than the average recreational player wants to put that kind of time in. So they are going to be more competitive and they should be rewarded for putting that time in.
I would say, Don, I agree that there's definitely not a one size fits all model. And Naira, for example, has done some things. I am very, I am very worthy of, I think are worthy of praise into how to manage this a little better. That might not work for another track, but
Right, because Naira's model, what they created, may work for them, but each track needs to do its own optimization exercise on its pools and then look at the individual bet files coming in from the CAW player and say, how is this affecting my pool?
100%.
Okay, so just want to jump in there. So what, these smaller tracks then that are struggling, and who don't have the smart boffins, telling them what to do and how to optimize this. What should they do then? What should some of these struggling tracks do to make sure they're optimizing it?
In this day and age, why don't they have access to, I mean, there are plenty of smart people out
Are
there.
you
that-
offering your
that can-
services?
No, I mean, but I'm seriously, I'm not partly, but joking, but not
Yeah.
really here. I mean, everybody has access to some group of professional mathematicians. You can do a simple economics exercise on your pool. It's no different than the stock market.
If your horseman's group has not been doing it, I think it's pretty clear there's a call to action to start doing so now and to being more engaged in this. And I would love to stay all day, but I have a flight.
Yeah,
to
that's
catch.
a
Sorry.
great ending point. Thank you. And let's give this panel a round of applause, please.
Thanks.